Okay, YouTube, here's part 2 of that important information from the previous video. The word he's going to say is the word disease. He's giving the definition of what it is. Here we go.
Disease is exactly what it says. It is cellular dis-ease. This is what is meant when you hear the statement, the terrain is everything, the germ is nothing. You have as much chance of catching potassium deficiency from bats, pigs, and coughing people as you do catching acne from a teenager. And we'll get into the experiments that prove this later in this film. In fact, the entire pharmaceutical and vaccine industry is based on a 240-year-old germ theory. Have you ever asked why it's still a theory and not proven after all of that time? Back to potassium. Potassium phosphate makes up the cells in Aries, the ram or lamb of God, which is our body's cerebrum, the higher God-mind brain that gives directives to our motor cerebellum to make the body do what we desire it to do and to start the alchemical processes to heal toxicity in the rest of the body. It also makes up the electric spinal cord, sensory nerves, and even the cells in our face to lower jaw, which is one of the main toxic ejection centers of the body through nasal cavities and the mouth for lung phlegm ejection. If you've ever been down with the flu or a bad cold, you know very well how much activity is going on in this region to eject toxins, stuffy or runny nose, cough, fever, headache, etc. But you also know that if you go to the pharmacy, the first thing they do is give you Tamiflu, nasal sprays, cough suppressants, and a plethora of drugs that shut down your body's ability to eject toxins this way, leaving them running amok in your body, doing all kinds of irreparable cellular destruction. Sure, these products short-circuit the Aries sensory nerve centers to make you feel better, in the same way a bottle of whiskey and 2 grams of cocaine make you forget that your arm is broken. But your arm is still broken. We somehow accept this as medicine. By no coincidence, potassium chloride is allocated to Gemini, the twins, named after our lungs, and make up the cells of the lungs, the pleura glands that cover our lungs, our bronchial tubes, and our body's fiber and tissues. Not only are the lungs where ferrum or iron in the red blood cells called hemoglobin carry oxygen to the rest of our body, but they are also another vital excretion point for toxic ejection through the mouth and nose. We'll get back to iron shortly. In the meantime, think of the role the lungs play in flu, colds, pneumonia, and all of these so-called respiratory viral diseases and deaths. Have you ever asked, if viruses are little magical unicorn bugs, why not take a tissue sample from anywhere else in the other 90% of your wet multi-trillion cellular body and see if you find them there? Why are we only testing potassium cellular centers of the body? Shouldn't these bugs be everywhere? If they can fly, surely they can swim. But back to Virgo and potassium sulfate, the solar plexus and the bowels, the other excretion point of toxins. Surely you've had diarrhea during the flu, and the essential oils that destroy viruses or cellular poisons. People who are deficient in potassium sulfate suffer from virulent diseases and are easily poisoned by tainted foods. They should be extremely careful relative to their diet and toxic flu shots as well, as potassium sulfate acts as a fuel. Deficiency in it will cause a person to feel suffocated, and he suffers greatly under certain atmospheric conditions. As the polar opposite of Virgo is Pisces, the fishes, allocates with ferrum or iron and makes up arterial blood and red corpuscles, the above symptom is usually aggravated when insufficient oxygen is obtained. Lack of iron causes depression, discouragement, and a feeling as if one were absolutely crushed, since the air pressure on the body is much greater than that within. The blood is thus poisoned and will eventually become very putrid, especially as potassium deficiency always accompanies lack of iron. Combustion cannot take place in the absence of air. An infallible modality indicative of potassium sulfate deficiency is a rise of temperature in the afternoon or early evening. The spiritual inspiration of God and man gives spiritual power and physical life. The word inspiration literally means...
By the way, you can't ignite rockets in space if there's no air. So how are rockets flying around in space when there's no combustion? If there's no air, there's no combustion. NASA's a liar too.
Means to breathe in. Iron attracts oxygen, in which is the breath of life, that which elevates, lifts up, and inspires. As the fluid of the body becomes depleted in iron, the corpuscles, or the fish germs of Pisces, slowly suffocate and eventually putrefy. This is the true cause of cancer. Without iron, combustion cannot go on. Potassium sulfate and ferrum iron are then the legitimate cure for this putrid and virulent disease. In Latin, the word ferrum is derived from the word ferro, meaning to bear, to bring, to carry. And this is the true nature of this magnetic salt. It bears, brings, and carries oxygen, the breath of life, the Spirit of God in man. Where strength and firmness are required, iron is used. Our strongest machinery is made of it. Iron and steel are used for the framework of buildings. Its use in the body is exactly the same, for strength. Therefore, in attracting oxygen, spirit, into the body, humanity is supplied with the strength to endure, to live, and to fight for the right. And so, when we are lacking in all three potassiums and iron, we get catarrhal conditions of the head and throat, which is inflammation of mucous membranes of the nose and air passages, often with slimy yellow or greenish matter. We get stuffy colds, fevers, bronchitis, coughs, pneumonia, whooping cough, rattling and gurgling of mucus in the chest, fungoid inflammation of the joints, and even blood poisoning. Basically what you call a bad cold or the flu. This is a color-stained micrograph of an aggregation of infected red blood cells with the phantom coronavirus. These so-called infected cells are nothing more than biological transforming red blood cells that are going through pleomorphic changes due to increased acidity and a declining pH value of less than 7.2. The biological transformation of blood or body cells is a natural process that takes place in an acidic environment of the interstitial fluids of the interstitium compartments, and then spilling over into the blood plasma via hydrostatic pressure caused by the buildup of dietary and metabolic acidic waste, which has not been properly eliminated by the lymphatic system via the 4 channels of elimination: urination, defecation, perspiration, and or respiration. By now, you've probably heard concerns that 5G uses multiple frequencies, including this 60 gigs, which stops the hemoglobin in your blood from taking up oxygen and being able to deliver it to the rest of your body. And that many doctors have come forward and are claiming the ventilators are suffocating and killing their patients, not helping them. You can pump as much oxygen into your lungs as you like, but it doesn't work if the lungs are not able to deliver it to the rest of your body. Would it be wise to start taking cell salt supplements of ferrum iron and potassium sulfate, chloride and potassium phosphate daily, now that these towers are going up everywhere while you're in lockdown? Do you think a vaccine that contains 0 iron or potassium is going to make you immune from this problem? The point of this film is not to give you any medical advice, only information so that you can make that decision for yourself. Association does not mean causation. Imagine every time you see an airplane or helicopter, you notice they always have windows on them. And therefore, windows must be the reason these vehicles are able to fly. Or saying that since cats share 90% of our human genes, we must be cats. Unfortunately, that's exactly how Rockefeller Big Pharma PCR tests and germ theory works. They assume that because they find partial genetic materials in the fluids of the body's cellular potassium centers that have 80% matches to genetic materials they found in some other sick person, and that they claim to be viruses, even though an alleged virus has still never been completely 100% isolated and proven to this day, that they must be viruses and must also be the cause of disease, because they're always there, just like windows are always on planes and helicopters that are flying. If a PCR test finds a genetic material in your fluid is a 90% match to a cat, you must be a cat.
So this is an example of how you could be misled by your observations and assume that it's a contagious process that passes an illness between people, when in actuality it is that they had a common exposure to some kind of toxic insult that caused the problem.
All at the same time in mass? Okay, so let me just play devil's advocate. So
I'm going to explain what they're going to say, because it's really long-winded and it's more simple than they explain it. When they first started creating the vaccines and they said that they found a cure for smallpox, the milkmaids were not contracting the smallpox. And the people at that time, there was a very large shortage of food. So the malnutrition and the lack of these potassiums that we talked about and the iron, people were very nutritionally devoid of these elements. So the body naturally creates its own mechanism for getting rid of toxic blood. You're not going to bleed out through the pustules, but it's just a reaction that happens. The doctor that created the vaccine, he did experiments by rubbing on the sores of the udders of the cow and injected it into this child who never ended up getting the actual disease. And they did the same thing with the Spanish flu, where this is really gross, really gross, but they would get the mucus and the cough and the sputum, and they would inject it into people, or they would put masks over the people who are sick and put the hooded masks over healthy people, and nobody contracted the flu, not even when they injected the sputum into their veins. So what I'm saying and what this video is saying is that there's no point in wearing a mask. There's no point in social distancing. None of that is going to prevent viruses or the so-called virus. It's just a natural process that happens in the body when you're low on nutrients. And what's coming with the 5G on top of our lack of nutrients, because the plants in the soil is depleted right now, and a lot of the foods we eat are full of pesticides and glyphosate from genetically modified foods. There's a lot of really bad things that we're ingesting and eating and drinking that we're unaware of, and all this creates toxicity, which causes cell damage, and cell damage causes the reaction that acts like viruses, and putting people on respirators. Only just they can't absorb the oxygen to take it through the hemoglobin throughout the rest of the body, because their immune system is compromised from the lack of the oil that is created by the presence of these three the potassiums. I had it written down, but I don't know where I put it. I will this video is another 20 minutes longer. I'm going to look through it, and I think there's some important stuff at the end regarding Bill Gates. So there's going to be part 3. All right, thank you.